Chapter 4. The Mission. I threw my right arm up to protect myself, the goad, attached by its strap to my wrists, flying wildly. I seized it, using it like a puny stick, striking at the great snapping beak that was trying to seize me, as if I were a scrap of food on the high, flat plate of the cylinder's roof. He lunged twice, and I struck it twice. He drew back his head again, spreading his beak, and prepared to slash downward again. In that instant, I switched the Tarn goad to the on position, and when the great beak flashed downward again, I struck it viciously, trying to force it away from me. The effect was startling. There was the sudden bright flash of yellow glittering light, the splash of sparks, and a scream of pain and rage from the Tarn as he immediately beat his wings, lifting himself out of my reach in a rush of air that nearly forced me over the edge of the roof. I was on my hands and knees, trying to get back upon my feet, too near the edge. The Tarn was circling the cylinder, uttering piercing cries. Then he began to fly away from the city. Without truly knowing why, and thinking I was better off to have the thing in retreat, I seized my Tarn whistle and blew its one shrill note. The giant bird seemed almost to shudder in the air, and then he reeled, losing altitude, gaining it again. If he had not been simply a winged beast, I would have believed him to be struggling with himself, a creature locked inwardly in mental torture. It was the wild nature of the Tarn, the call of the distant hills, the open sky, against the puny conditioning he'd been subjected to, against the will of tiny men with their private objectives, their elementary psychology of stimulus and response, their training wires and Tarn goads. At last, with a wild cry of rage, the Tarn returned to the cylinder, and I seized the sword-mounting ladder, swinging wildly from the saddle, and climbing it, seating myself in the saddle, fastening the broad purple belt that would keep me from tumbling to my death. The Tarn is guided by virtue of a throat strap, to which are attached normally 6 leather streamers, or reins, which are fixed in a metal ring upon the forward portion of the sandal. The reins are of different colors, but one learns them by ring position, not color. Each of the rein attaches to a small ring upon the throat strap, and the rings are placed evenly, accordingly. The mechanics are simple. One draws on the streamer or rein, which is attached to the ring most nearly approximating the direction in which one wishes to go. For example, to land or lose altitude, one uses the forestrap, which exerts pressure upon the forering, which is located beneath the throat of the Tarn. To rise into flight or gain altitude, one draws upon the one strap, which exerts pressure on the one ring, which is located upon the back of the Tarn's neck. The throat strap rings, corresponding to the position of the reins on the main saddle ring, are numbered in a clockwise fashion. The Tarn goad also is occasionally used in guiding the bird. One strikes the bird in the opposite direction to which one wishes to go, and the bird, withdrawing from the goad, moves in that direction. There is very little precision in this method, however, because of the reactions of the bird are merely instinctive, and he may not withdraw in the exact tangent desired. Moreover, there is a danger in using the goad excessively. It tends to become less effective if often used, and the rider is then at the mercy of the Tarn. I drew back on the one strap, and, filled with terror and exhilaration, felt the power of those gigantic wings beating upon the invisible air. My body lurched wildly, but the saddle belt held. I could not breathe for a moment, but clung, frightened and thrilled, to the saddle ring, my hand wrapped upon the one strap. The Tarn continued to climb, and I saw the city of cylinders dropping far below me like a set of rounded children's blocks set upon the gleaming green hills. I had never experienced anything like this, and if man ever felt godlike, I suppose I did in those first savage, exhilarating moments. I looked below and saw older Tarl, mounted upon his own Tarn, climbing to overtake me. When he was near, he shouted up at me, the words merry but indistinct within the rush of air. "Oh, child," he called, "do you seek to climb to the moons of Gor?" I suddenly realized that I felt dizzy, or slightly so, but that magnificent black Tarn was still climbing, though now struggling, his wings beating fiercely with frustrated persistence against that thinning, resistant air. The hills and plains of Gor were a blaze of the colors far below me, and it may have been my imagination, but it seemed almost as if I could see the very curve of the world. I realized now it must have been the thin air and my excitement. Unfortunately, before losing consciousness, I drew upon the forestaff, and the Tarn leveled out, and then lifted his wings over his back, and dropped like a striking hawk, with a speed that left me without breath in my body. I released the reins, letting them hang upon the saddle ring, which is a signal for constant and straight flight, no pressure upon any of the throat straps. The great Tarn snapped his wings out, catching the air under them, and smoothly began to fly a straight course, his wings beating slowly but steadily in a cruising speed that would soon take us far beyond the towers of the city. Older Tarl, who seemed pleased, drew near. He pointed back toward the city, which was now several miles within the distance. "I will race you," I cried. "Agreed," he shouted, and wheeling his Tarn in the instant he spoke, and turning him to the city. I was dismayed. His skill was such that he had taken a lead that it would be impossible to overcome. But at last I managed to turn the bird, and we were streaking along in the wake of the older Tarl. Certain of his cries drifted back to us. He was urging his Tarn to greater speed by a series of shouts intended to communicate his own excitement to his winged mount. The thought flashed through my mind that Tarn should be trained to respond to voice commands, as well as to the numbered straps and the Tarn goad. That they had not been seemed astounding to me. I shouted to my Tarn in Gorean, and in English, "Harta, harta, faster, faster." The great bird seemed to sense what I intended, or perhaps it was merely his sudden realization that the other Tarn was in the lead, but a remarkable transformation swept over my sable-plumed speed. His neck straightened, his wings cracked like whips within the sky, and his eyes became fiery. Every bone and muscle seemed to leap with his power, and in a dizzying minute or two we had passed the older Tarl, to his amazement, and had settled again in a flurry of wings upon the top of the cylinder from which we had departed a few minutes before. "By the beards of the priest-kings," roared Ordle Tarl, as he brought his bird to the roof, "that is a Tarn of Tarns." The Tarns, then released, winged their way back to their cots, and the older Tarl and I descended to my apartment. He was bursting open with pride. "What a Tarn," he marveled. "I had a full passing start, and yet you passed me." The passing is a measure of distance on Gor, equivalent to approximately 1/7 of a mile. "That Tarn," he said, "was bred for you, specially selected for the best broods of the finest of our war Tarns. It was within you and mine that the keepers of the Tarns worked, breeding and crossbreeding, training and retraining." "I thought," I said, "on the roof it would kill me. It seems the Tarn keepers do not train their prodigies as well as they might." "No," cried older Tarl, "that training is perfect. The spirit of the Tarn must not be broken, not that of a war Tarn. He is trained to the point where it is necessary for a strong master to decide whether he shall serve him or slay him. You will come to know your Tarn. He will come to know you. You will be as one in the sky, the Tarn, the body, you the mind and will. You will live in an armed truce with the Tarn. If you become weak or helpless, he will kill you. As long as you remain strong and his master, he will serve you, respect you, and obey you. He paused. We were not sure of you, your father and myself, but today I am sure. You have mastered a Tarn, a war Tarn, and in your veins must flow the blood of your father, once Ubar, war chieftain, now administrator of Korobar, the city of cylinders. I was surprised, for this was the first time I had known that my father had been war chieftain of the city, or that he was even now one of its supreme civil officials, or for that matter, that the city was named Korobar, a now archaic expression for a village market. The Grians have a habit of not revealing names easily. For themselves, particularly among the lower castes, they often have a real name, and what is called a use name. Often only the closest relatives ever truly know the real name. And on the level of the first knowledge, it is maintained that knowing the real name gives one a power over a person, a capacity to use that name in spells and insidious magical practices. Perhaps something of the same sort lingers even now upon our native earth, where the first name of a person is reserved for use by those who know him intimately and presumably wish him no harm. The second name, which would correspond to the use name upon Gor, is common property, a public sound not sacred or to be protected at the level of the second knowledge. Of course, the high castes, at least in general, recognize the baseless superstition of the lower castes, and use their own names comparatively freely, usually followed by the name of their city. For example, I would give my name as Tarl Kavat of Korobar, or more simply, Tarl of Korobar. The lower castes, incidentally, commonly believe that the name of the high castes are actually use names, and that the high castes conceal with dark magic their real names. Our discussion terminated abruptly, for there was a rush of wings outside the window of my apartment, and the older Tarl flung himself across the room and did drag me to the floor. At the same moment the iron bolt of a crossbow, fired through one of those narrow windows, struck the wall behind my chair stone, and ricocheted most viciously. I caught a glimpse of a black helmet through the port as a warrior, still clutching a crossbow and mounted upon his Tarn, hurled up on the one strap and flew from the window. There were shouts and a rushing, and I saw several answering bolts leave the cylinder and fly in the direction of the retreating assailant, who was now almost half a pasong away and making good upon his escape. A member of the caste of assassins, said the older Tarl, gazing upon the retreating speck in the distance. Melanius, who would be Ubar of all Gor, knows of your existence. Who is Malinus? I asked, shaken. You will learn in the morning, said older Tarl. In the morning you will learn why you have been brought to Gor. Why can't I know now? I demanded. Because the morning will come soon enough, said old Tarl. I looked at him. Yes, he said. Tomorrow will be soon enough. Tonight? I asked. Tonight, he said. We will get drunk. In the morning I woke upon the sleeping mat in the corner of my apartment, cold and shivering. It was shortly before dawn. I turned off the power switch upon the mat and folded back its blanketed sides. It was much chilly to the touch now, because I had set the chronometric temperature device to turn to cold an hour before first light. one has little inclination to remain upon a freezing bed. I decided I disapproved of the green devices for separating mortals from their beds, as much as I loathed the alarm clocks and clock radios of my own world. Besides, I had a headache like the beating of spears upon a bronze shield, a headache that drove all lesser considerations, such as the attempt upon my life, from my mind. The planet might be exploding, and a man would stop to remove a burr from his sandal. I sat up, cross-legged upon the mat, which was now returning to room temperature. I struggled to my feet and staggered to the laving bowl on the table and splashed some water upon my face. I could remember something of the night before, but not much. The older Tarl and I had made a round of taverns in the various cylinders, and I recall toddling precariously, singing obscene camp lyrics along different narrow bridges, about a yard wide without rails, and the earth somewhere below. How far I had no idea at the time. If we were upon the high bridges, it would have been more than 1,000 feet away. The older Tarl and I may have drunk too much of that fermented brew, concocted with fiendish skill from that yellow grain, Sa-Tana, and called Paga-Santana, pleasure of the life-daughter. Always Paga for short. I doubt that I would ever touch that stuff again. I remember, too, the girls in the last tavern, if it was even a tavern, lascivious in their dancing silks, pleasure slaves bred like animals for passion. If they were natural slaves and natural free men, as the older Tarl had insisted, these girls were natural slaves. It was impossible to conceive to them as other than what they had been, but somewhere they, too, must be awakening painfully, struggling to their feet and needing to clean themselves. One in particular I remembered, her body like a cheetah, her black hair wild upon her brown shoulders, the bangles on her ankles, the sound in the curtain alcove. I felt the thought crossing my mind that I would have liked to own that one for more than the hour. I shook the thought from my aching head, and made an unsuccessful effort to muster a decent sense of shame. Failed, and was belting my tunic when the older Tarl entered the room. "You are going to the chamber of the council," he said. I followed. The chamber of the council is the room in which the elected representative of the high castes of Koraba hold their meetings. Each city has such a chamber. It was in the widest of cylinders, and the ceiling was at least 6 times the height of the normal living level. The ceiling was lit as if by stars. The walls were of 5 colors, applied laterally, beginning from the bottom: white, blue, yellow, green, red, the caste colors. Benches of stone, on which the chambers of the council sat, rose in their 5 monumental tiers about the walls, 1 tier for each of the high castes. These tiers shared the color of that portion of the wall behind them, the caste colors. The tier nearest the floor, which denoted some preferential status, or the white tier, was occupied by the initiates, interpreters of the will of the priest-kings. In order, the ascending tiers, blue, yellow, green, and red, were occupied by the representatives of scribes, builders, physicians, and warriors. Torm, I observed, was not seated in the tier of scribes. I smiled to myself. "I am," Torm had said, "too particular to involve myself in the frivolities of government." I suppose the city would be under siege, and even Torm would fail to notice. I was pleased to note that my own caste, that of the warriors, was accorded the least of the statuses. If I had had my will, the warriors would not even be a high caste. On the other hand, I objected to the initiates being in a place of honor, as it seemed to me that they, even more than the warriors, were an unproductive member of society. For the warriors, at least, one could say that they afforded protection to the city. But for initiates one could say very little, perhaps only that they provided some comfort for the ills and plagues, largely of their own manufacture. In the center of the amphitheater was a throne of office, and upon this throne, in his robe of state, a plain brown garment, the humblest cloth in the hall, sat my father, the administrator of Korobar, once Ubar, the war chieftain of the city. At his feet lay a helmet, a shield, a spear, and a sword. "Come forward, tall Cabot," said my father, and I stood before his throne of office, feeling the eyes of everyone in the chambers upon me. Behind me stood the older Tarl. I had noted that those blue Viking eyes showed almost no evidence of the previous night, and I hated that most briefly. The older Tarl was speaking. "I, Tarl, swordsman of Korobar, give my word that this man is fit to become a member of the high caste of warriors." My father answered him, speaking in ritual phrases. "No tower in Korobar is stronger than the word of Tarl, this swordman of our city. I, Matthew Cabot of Korobar, accept this word." Then, beginning with the lowest tier, each member of the council spoke in session, giving his name, and pronouncing that he, too, accepted the word of the blond swordsman. When they had finished, my father invested upon me the arms which is laid before the throne. About my shoulder he slung the steel sword, fastened upon my left arm the round shield, placed in my right hand the spear, and lowered the helmet upon my head. "Will you keep the code of the warrior?" asked my father. "Yes," I said, "I will keep to the code." "What is your home stone?" asked my father. Sensing what was wanted, I replied, "My home stone is the home stone of Korobar." "Is it to that city that you pledge your life, your honor, and your sword?" asked my father. "It is," I said. "Then," said my father, placing his hands solemnly upon my shoulders, "in virtue of my authority as the administrator of the city, and in the presence of the council of the high castes, I declare you to be a warrior of Korobar." My father was smiling. I undonned my helmet, feeling proud, as I heard the approval of the council, both in voice and by Gurian applause, the quick repeated striking of the left shoulder with the palm of the right hand. Aside from candidates for the status of warrior, none of my caste was permitted to enter the council armed. Had they been armed, my caste brothers in the last tier would have struck their spear blades upon their shields. As it was, they smote their shoulders in the civilian manner, more exuberantly perhaps than was compatible with the decorum of the weighty chamber. Somehow I had the feeling that they were generally proud of me, though I had no idea why. I had done nothing yet to warrant their commendation. With the older Tarl, I left the chamber of the council and entered a room off the chamber to wait for my father. In this room was a table, and upon that table was a set of maps. The older Tarl immediately went to these maps, and, calling me by his side, began to poke downward with his spear. "There," he said, "is the city of Ar, the hereditary enemy of Korobar, the central city of Marlenus, who intends to be Ubar of Gor." "This has something to do with me?" I asked. "Yes," spoke older Tarl. "You are going to Ar. You are going to steal the homestone of Ar and bring it to Korobar."